Hi beekeepers, today I'm going to answer the question, should you use a flow frame? Once and for all, the definitive answer. All right, man, nothing stirs up beekeepers quite like a flow hive, right? So we're going to talk about flow hives, flow frames, and why you might want to choose one, believe it or not, or why you might not want to choose one. So first of all, let's talk about what is a flow frame. And I'm not talking about how it works. I'm assuming you know how it works. But the real thing that I want to talk about is how we need to think about this. This is just an alternate form of extracting honey. And that's how we need to think of it, is this is a honey extraction tool. And it's different than a rotary honey extractor, and that's the only way we think of it. Now that we know that, it's a honey extraction tool. That's it. Nothing special, nothing miraculous. Everything else about this is standard beekeeping. So now that we know that it's just a honey extraction tool, let's think about how it might fit into your decision to get or not get this. So when you get into beekeeping, your experience is going to be uniquely yours, but you're going to go down one of three general routes. The first one is the tap out, right? You get into beekeeping and you get stung, and you react terribly, or your spouse or your kids or your dog or whatever the deal is. You can't get the stupid bees to get past winter. They die every winter, or they're attacking your neighbor's swimming pool. You've seen them all, right? That's what causes people to say, I'm out of this, I'm done. For that group of people, it makes no sense to buy an expensive honey extraction tool when you never get to the point of actually extracting honey. So the problem, of course, is that you don't know that going in, that you're not going to get there. But let's hedge our bets and say, let's assume that I don't need this tool until I get to the point where I'm going to extract honey. So that's the key thing. So that's one path that you might take, is the tap out. For those people, flow hives, flow frames make no sense. Second path you might take, which is kind of on the opposite end, is the person who, this scratches your itch, man. Beekeeping is what you were born to do. And for those people, they go from 1 hive to 10 hives to like 100 hives just overnight. They love this stuff, eat it up, right? So for those people, what happens is a flow frame makes no sense whatsoever, right? Because what they're doing is they're working on an equation, right? This is more of a business, and they have to have a return on investment. So there's a cost for extraction. So if they've got a bunch of these frames and this is what they're using, they just drop it into a rotary extractor that, I don't know, maybe they spent $300 for, right? Whether they have 1 hive or 100 hives, that $300 rotary extractor is working for them. So it scales from 1 to 5 to 50 to 100 to 500, right? So that $300 extractor is their extraction cost. Now, to get $300 worth of this tool, it doesn't scale at all, right? You can't get 100 hives extracted with this tool for $300. You can only do it with a rotary extractor. So for the people that veer off to that commercial route, or the larger scale route, let's say, flow frames, flow hives don't make a lot of sense. And that leaves us with kind of the middle ground, and really where the flow hive was marketed and the flow frames were marketed. And that's kind of the backyard beekeeper. You get into beekeeping and you don't want to make it a career, and you don't actually hate it. You like it, mosquitoes. And so you have a couple hives, 1, 2, 5, whatever the magic number is. And that's where you stay. So those people are the ones that are ultimately going to want to consider flow hives and flow frames. Well, let's talk about that for just a second and figure out what the decision is, and more importantly, when to make that decision. And that's the key, is when to make the decision about a flow frame. So when you're a backyard beekeeper, you have a couple of decisions to make. One of them is, what hive are you going to use, right? Are you going to use a Kenyan top bar? Are you going to use a long Langstroth hive? Are you going to use a stacked Langstroth hive? Are you going to use a Warre hive? Are you going to use my plug experimental Parkinson hive? So your hive that you choose is going to dictate your entire beekeeping experience. A horizontal Langstroth hive has a completely different experience than a vertical stacked hive, right? Much gentler inspections, much more frequent visits, things like that. So you can look up all those hives and figure that out for yourself. But let's say that you're in the Langstroth territory. Now that you've decided long Langstroth, Parkinson hive, or vertical Langstroth, you have the challenge of getting that hive through winter. So you have to deal with wax moths, mites, small hive beetles. You have to do the feeding and all that stuff. You have to get your bees through winter, because the first year, all you're doing is letting them build up resources. You got your nuke, your package, whatever, you're building up resources, getting them through winter. They come out of winter, hopefully they have enough resources, and off into spring they go. And it's not until you get to that off into spring they go that you have to start thinking about, okay, now how am I going to extract honey? Because they're going to start, rebuilding and repairing and, getting their brood chamber set. And pretty soon I'm going to have to throw something in there for them to start storing up their honey. And that something could be a flow frame. Okay, so when you get to that point, you can say, you know what, I'm just going to buy these. That's it. Nothing wrong with that. You can also say, you know what, I'm just going to go with standard equipment and I'm never going to look back. Or you can say, I'm going to get standard equipment and see if I like it. And if I don't like it, then I'm going to ditch it and use this, right? Maybe you rent the extractor from the bee club, or maybe they give it to you for free, whatever. And you use that for a year and say, that's not my deal. I'm going to go with these. But the key point is that you make that decision after you get your bees through their winter, right? After you've got some experience. And so that's the thing that I want to emphasize is don't make that decision right away. You don't make that decision when you're buying the hive. Buy standard Langstroth equipment, build a long Langstroth, whatever the deal is, but don't make this decision until you've got your bees through winter. Now, another thing that I want to talk about, a secret thing, is how these actually work. So here's the problem. I see the marketing videos, and I see the people who've spent a lot of money on these kind of justifying their decision and saying, these are great. And they're not wrong, but they're not right. Let me tell you the reality of a long flow frame and how it actually works. Put it in context. So, and my experience is Wisconsin, so you have to keep that in mind too. So bees come out, and in spring they're rebuilding and filling up the brood chamber area basically, and then it's time to add a super. Great, we're going to slap this on there. This is like 2 shallows, or whatever they call them. So there's a lot here. There's a lot for them to build up, and where I live, that's going to take all spring, most of summer, right up to the point where it gets dry and the darth, or whatever they call it, hits. So we need to be aware that this is a lot of honey, right? And in a bad year, they won't get this full. It just doesn't happen. Like if it rains a lot, they won't get this full where I live. So in a good year, though, in a perfect year, what happens is they get this full, and just before it gets dry, you need to get the honey out of here. And in the videos, they show you, they crack this open and then honey comes out of here. It sort of does. Not when it's cold. So you're not going to do that when it's 60 degrees. It's got to be hot, right? And it doesn't just come out in 5 minutes. To get this really emptied is going to take a couple hours. So what the reality is, you need a hot day, block of a couple hours, where you're going to go down there, crack this open, put on your bee stuff on a hot day, crack this open, go down there, run the tubes out, put them into jars, and you have to cover them because it's going to be open for a long time. And if you don't cover them, you're going to have yellow jackets and bees everywhere. It's just a disaster. So you need that, and all your stars have to align. Like it's kind of the end of the flow, and it's a nice weekend, and you've got time, and it's sunny, and all that's going to work perfectly. And it doesn't. So here's how it really works in real life. You know what? You go down there and you say, I have to take this honey out, but the other part of this is this thing can't be sitting in my hive through winter either. They'll tell you that you're not supposed to have these in the hive through winter. So that means I got to get it off the hive, Okay, well, if I'm going to take this off the hive and I have to get the honey out, I may as well do both at the same time, right? So you end up, the way you harvest these is you go down there and you take them out one at a time, brush the bees off or blow them off, and you take them up to wherever you harvest your honey and you drain the honey up there. And then when you're done, you set them outside and let the bees clean them up, which is what you saw at the beginning of the video. So the reason that you don't let them sit in your hive over winter is because couplefold. If they're empty and they get moldy, it's a mess, right? I didn't do this. This is somebody else's flow frame, but they will get moldy, and then it's a mess, and you've got to deal with that. So the point in all that is to kind of tell you that while there's the marketing video, that's not exactly how it works. And while I'm sure there are people who can make that work, it doesn't work for me that way. You know, my time slots and the weather here and things just don't work that way. So you're going to end up pulling these out just like you would anything else. You're going to drag them back and you're going to harvest them and let the bees clean them up. And so that's really the way that those flow frames work. Now, when you're all done, right? And the question is, who would I recommend these things to? Well, it comes down to kind of, if you're a commercial guy and you want to tinker, have at it, right? If you're a backyard beekeeper, I have no problem with them. They do work, right? They're a tool that extracts honey, and they do work at extracting honey. I think personally, if you use them in a long Langstroth hive or my Parkinson hive, I think they work better there. And the reason I think they work better there is because with a traditional stacked Langstroth, you put a whole box of them on at a time. You take a whole box off at a time. In a long Langstroth, you can say, you know what, I'm going to put 3 of them in, right? And you have that option to put 3 of them, 4 of them, 5 of them, whatever works for the bees that year, based on the weather, based on the blooms, based on everything like that. So it's a little easier to make it fit, right? And so at the end of the day, it comes down to, when you get into beekeeping, you don't know the path you're going to take. So don't buy an expensive honey extraction tool until you know the path you're on. And then once you're on that path and you're pretty sure that that's the path you're going to stay on, then consider buying it if that's the way you want to go, compared to, a rotary extractor. Now, I'll tell you, in terms of cleanup and mess and stuff like that, it's the same. You're harvesting, it's the same. It's just different. So do what you want. I don't have any problem recommending them to people. I don't have any problem telling people, a rotary extractor is a little more common sense in terms of scaling to meet the needs. If you add more hives, it costs less, things like that. So in terms of business sense, it makes a lot more sense to get a rotary extractor. In terms of just having something neat where you can tinker around in your backyard, these are kind of cool. So do what you want. I will say that two things in closing here. If you get these, get the original. Don't get the Chinese knockoffs, although they're exactly the same, almost exactly the same. It's basically international patent violations of some Chinese company making these. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is that in my experimental hive, my Parkinson hive, I can have a top bar right next to a regular frame right next to one of these. And I've done this a couple of times, and every single time the bees choose the top bar first. They choose the Langstroth frame with the foundation in it next, and then they choose this. And the first time you put a new one in, you have to spray it with sugar water like crazy to make them use it, and you have to run them out of room. This is the last thing they'll use, but they will use it. So just be aware that it's not their favorite thing. And you'll never see that in the marketing videos either. But that's what I've learned about them. I hope that helps. I hope that helps you make your decision. And we'll see you next time.